Hey everyone, Mr. Foster here. Almost 5:30 on Friday afternoon. Finally has some time to sit down and make a video update for this week. So in this video update, I want to talk about the short story that we were looking at this week. Joyce Carol Oates, Where Are You Going? Where Have You Been? And talk about it in the way that something that I like to do before we really jump into our actual literary analysis that we're going to be turning in for a grade, right? So I want to do some things on this update where I'm kind of giving you some tips and tricks, some advice, but on top of that, also kind of my personal analysis on this story. Okay, so if you do have the textbook that we need, Kelly J. Mays uh, Norton Introduction to Literature. Please try to make sure you have this book because kind of after this week, we need to have it so we can use it. This is on page 95. The story itself is on page 95 in the book. Um, and what I want to spend some time talking about in this update is the story itself, kind of my take on it, but also different approaches you can use when you're doing literary analysis. Okay. So the first thing I want us to think about is when you are approaching a story, a poem, a play, like drama, right? Those are the three things we're going to look at this semester. You have two ways that you can start your analysis, okay? Excuse me. And those two ways are concrete and abstract. All right, so concrete and abstract. Now, the easiest thing to start with is probably the concrete. So let's start there with this story, okay? So, what are some of the things that we know for certain, that we know for a fact, that are concrete pieces of information about this story? We know for a fact, under our category of concrete details, that we have a girl named Connie, right? She is 15, she is in high school. We know that she has a mother, father, and a sister, right? So we know Connie, we know how old she is, we know her family. What are some other things we know as far as concrete details? We know that we are somewhere in the 1960s, right? Maybe mid to late 1960s, and we're in America, right? So we know those things for a fact, right? Some of the things that might be more abstract are things like the meaning of the character of Arnold Friend, right? That shows up in the second half of the story. Um, and other things like that, right? Things that we can maybe guess about, but we don't know for a fact. Um, things like Connie's relationship with her father, right? We get some details about that, but we don't really know for a fact a whole lot of information about her relationship with her dad, right? So that is something that may be more abstract that we don't have all the details on, right? So that's one of the first things I want you to think about when you're going into a text, right? A piece of writing is what are the things that you can say are concrete for certain, and what are the things that are maybe more abstract that we don't know for a fact, right? That we maybe have to interpret a little bit. Okay. So, that's one thing. Another thing I want you to think about are what are the different approaches you can take to analyze something, right? So, first and foremost, obviously, you could analyze the main character, in this case, Connie. So, you could talk about Connie and analyze her. You can analyze the setting, right? You can analyze how this story utilizes the setting of, like 1960s America, and what does that have to do with the message that the story is trying to convey? You could talk about the use of music, right? You might notice it says that this story is for Bob Dylan. He's a musical artist. How does music play a role in this story, right? you might notice that music is kind of constantly going on in the background of this story. It's like ever present, right? Music is always in this story, but really the biggest description that we get of the music comes at in the book, the bottom of page 97, where it says that Connie is listening to the XYZ. Sorry, my cat is getting on the desk here. So this is Turbo. If I ever get interrupted, it's because of Turbo. So everyone say hi to Turbo. All right. So what was I talking about? Yes. So the music in the story. The only real description we ever get of the music, if you've got the book, this is the bottom of page 97, says Connie is listening to the XYZ Sunday Jamboree, record after record of hard, fast, shrieking songs she sang along with, right? So if you were writing about the use of music in this story, that is something that you would pull from the text to mention, right? So I want you to be thinking about that, right? You're not just um, like obligated to just write about the most obvious thing. You can pick something, some kind of element of the story that's working, and write about that, right? But let's kind of stick with Connie for right now, right? So let's talk about the character of Connie. And what I want us to do as we're going through this is get into the habit of whatever it is that we are talking about. I want us to find evidence from the text that will support what it is we're saying, right? So let's build this description of Connie. So the story starts, her name was Connie. She was 15 and she had a quick, nervous, giggling habit of craning her neck to glance into mirrors or checking other people's faces to make sure her own was all right. Those are the opening lines of the story. So just from those opening lines, what can we tell about Connie? Maybe she is a vain person. Maybe she has vanity issues where she is always worried about her appearance, right? A little bit further down the page, it says her mind was all filled with trashy daydreams. What does that tell us about Connie? If it says that her mind was all filled with trashy daydreams, right? Toward the bottom of the page, it talks about what they wear when they go out. This paragraph at the bottom, it says they must have been familiar sights, walking around the shopping plaza in their shorts and flat ballerina slippers that always scuffed on the sidewalks, with charm bracelets jingling on their thin wrists. They would lean together and whisper and laugh secretly if someone passed who assumed or interested them, right? So we get description, we get details that tell us things about this character, right? One that is very, very important here. It says everything about her had two sides to it, one for home and one for anywhere that was not home. Her walk, which could be childlike and bobbing, or languid enough to make anyone think she was hearing music in her head, right? And there again is that mention of music, right? So just on this first page, what can we tell about Connie, right? We need to pick up clues from the text that tell us about this character. I think the most telling one is where it says everything about her had two sides to it, one for home and one for anywhere that was not home. Okay? So I want to kind of give my own personal interpretation of this story hopefully, without making this video way too long. This story kind of has two halves to it, right? Which maybe matches up with this two sides of Connie, right? So what do we know about Connie? What does she like to do? She likes to go out, right? It says that her friend's dad would take them out and drop them off and then come and pick them back up, right? But what does Connie really do? It says that she'll go shopping or go to the movies, but instead of actually doing that, this is on the top of the next page in the book, 96. It says sometimes they did go shopping or to a movie, but sometimes they went across the highway, ducking fast across the busy road to a drive in restaurant where older kids hung out. That's important, okay? So, does Connie always do what she says she's going to do? No, right? In this instance, she sneaks off with a boy and then meets back up with her friend, right? And it says something about um, after that happens. It says when Connie came up, the two girls smiled at each other, and Connie said, "How was the movie?" And the girl said, "You should know." Right? They rode off with the girl's father, sleeping and pleased. And Connie couldn't help but look back at the darkened shopping plaza with its big empty parking lot and signs that were faded and ghostly now. And over at the drive-in restaurant where cars were circling tirelessly, she couldn't hear the music. There's again the mention of music. She couldn't hear the music at this distance, okay? So what this is talking about is Connie didn't watch the movie. She instead kind of snuck off with a boy and then finished hanging out with the boy and then met back up with her friend to get her ride back home, right? During this, she was with a boy named Eddie, and I think this is where it mentions that a certain someone sees Connie. Someone sees Connie while she's out. That's important for later in the story, okay? So fast forward, it's a Sunday morning and the family leaves to go to like a cookout and Connie is left home alone, okay? Now I want you to think back to this idea that there's two sides to Connie, the at-home Connie and the not at-home Connie. Connie is at home by herself. And this is where we talked about earlier that she was listening to the radio and it's really hot, right? It says it was too hot. She was outside. It says it was too hot. She went inside the house and turned the radio to drown out the quiet. Okay. Now, before I get too far ahead of myself, I want to share. This is not my personal interpretation of this story, but a student last semester, this past spring, gave this interpretation of the story that everything that happens past this point where it says she shook her head as if to get awake, period. It was too hot. She went inside the house and turned on the radio to drown out the quiet. A student made the argument that everything that happens past this point is actually not really happening. It's like a daydream that Connie has. It says the students argued that maybe Connie fell asleep outside in the heat and then dreamed the rest of the story. That was that student's interpretation, right? Um, So here it is, right? Uh, something kind of bad happens, right? So at the top of page 98, it says, and Connie paid close attention to herself, bathed in a glow and slow pulsed joy that seemed to rise mysteriously out of the music, again, music itself. And here's the word languidly again. This is used again in for I think the second time in the story talking about Connie, and lay languidly about the airless little room, breathed in and breathed out with each gentle rise and fall of her chest. After a while, she heard a car coming up the drive. Uh-oh. So this is where Arnold Friend enters the story. And basically the rest of the story from this point out is just a back and forth between Arnold Friend and Connie and Arnold Friend's friend that comes with him. I can't remember his name right now. Uh, whatever that guy's name is. Ellie. His friend Ellie. So they arrive at Connie's house and do a bunch of really creepy and threatening things. So long story short, Arnold Friend wants Connie to come get in the car with him and Ellie and go for a drive, right? Go for a drive with them. And Connie kind of has this weird back and forth where at some point she doesn't really like reject Arnold Friend. She doesn't really say yes, but she doesn't really say no. And Arnold Friend keeps pressing, right? He keeps getting closer. So he like starts beside the car and then he gets out and then kind of comes toward the house. But it's important, he never actually comes inside the house, right? He never really comes inside. He says that he won't come inside if Connie just does what he asks, right? And that Connie doesn't want anything bad to happen to her family. Arnold Friend knows a lot about Connie, right? He kind of weirdly and creepily knows a bunch of details about Connie and her family, right? But I want to talk about this, right? So, like I said, for the sake of, not making this like a 30-minute long update, I want to give kind of my interpretation of the story. I'm assuming you've read it, right? That was your task, was to read the story and to do the handout. But here's my personal interpretation. Um, Arnold Friend is a representation of everything that Connie goes out and seeks when she goes and kind of sneaks off at night. When she says she's going to a movie or she says she's going shopping, but she actually runs across the highway and goes to this drive-in restaurant where it says the older kids hang out, right? She goes to where the older kids hang out. So, in my personal interpretation, what Joyce Carol Oates is writing about here is what happens when the two sides of Connie come together and she can't escape, right? So, notice when Connie goes out, she always kind of has everything under control and planned out, right? Her friend's father takes her and her friend, drops them off. They're going shopping or watching a movie, but not really. It says sometimes they do, but other times, most of the time, they run across the highway and hang out where the older kids hang out at this drive-in restaurant and kind of like talk to older boys, right? But Connie seemingly is always in control of that, right? She can always leave, she can always catch her ride and go safely back home. But that's the one side of Connie. That's the not at home Connie. And what we see here in the second half of the story is when her family leaves her to go to the cookout that Connie doesn't want to go to, she's left home alone. And that Arnold Friend is this representation of that kind of danger and thrill seeking that she does when she goes out at night. Except now she can't run. She can't go anywhere, right? She is met and kind of trapped by this representation of that lifestyle that she lives, right? And Joyce Carol Oates, I think, is kind of making this as a cautionary tale of be careful what you want and be careful what you seek, because what happens when that starts to seek you out, right? So remember, Arnold Friend knows where Connie lives. He knows all this information about Connie. And, it could be very well argued that he has been stalking Connie for some time. And now that he knows that her family has left her by herself at home, he is making his move, right? He is finally kind of making his play on Connie. And notice how Connie reacts, right? For the majority of the interaction, she is not necessarily rejecting Arnold Friend. She's kind of doing this back and forth with him, where she's not telling him, she's not saying no, but she's not saying yes. And it's not until Arnold Friend becomes more threatening and gets closer to the house where there's only the screen door in between them. And remember, Connie goes and tries to use the phone. And something very, very weird happens when Connie goes to use the phone. It's like everything goes mute. And it says she like silently screams and lets out a big scream, but there's no sound, right? And the student that said that this was a dream kind of used that as their argument of how there was no sound in that moment and that they thought it was a dream because of that. But that is my personal interpretation of this story, is that it is Joyce Carol Oates talking about what happens when this character's two sides are unable to be separated from each other, right? What happens when Connie's not at home uh, actions catch up with the life she lives at home? and that is represented through the character of Arnold Friend. He's this, kind of uh, shaggy haired, leather jacket, Bob Dylan like character, right? And you notice he actually kind of uses some like Bob Dylan lyrics in some way to talk to Connie. And there's also evidence in the description, and this is where we go back to talking about concrete and abstract, right? There is some evidence that points to he might be intoxicated, right? He might be drunk when he comes to Connie's house. It says when he tries to walk towards the house, it kind of describes it as like this kind of like zombie-ish shuffle, and that could be evidence to say that he might be intoxicated or drunk when he arrives, right? But those are just things I want you to think about, right, as we get into this literary analysis stuff we're going to be doing, right? So hopefully you found kind of my take on this story helpful, and maybe this could help you kind of shed some light on what you can do as we begin doing these actual literary analysis papers. So if you want to share your thoughts on what I had to say, right, you can send me a video. Send me an email about the video update, kind of maybe we can talk about some of the things going on in this story in different ways you can analyze things, right? But other than that, this video has gone on for 20 minutes now, so I want to make sure I stop so I don't have any trouble uploading. But I wanted to share my thoughts on the story, kind of give you my interpretation on it, and give you some kind of direction on how to do literary analysis. All right. So please, again, make sure you have this book because after this week, we're really going to jump in and start using it. Okay. So if you have any thoughts or questions or anything like that, please let me know. Other than that, have a good weekend, and I will see you in the next video update.